Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As it says up there, I'm Steve Smith. That's more of a reminder for me than for anyone else, so I can remember who I am. So who am I? I managed to come out of school with our O-level, so I'm actually probably more qualified to be here than I am actually in my own day job. That's all I managed to squeeze out. But I stumbled into an apprenticeship in 1973. Very fortunate. Went with someone else to an interview and they didn't get the job and I did. Not quite sure how that worked out. Always been good at faking it, so bear that in mind as you go through my presentation. I spent 6 years with Post Office Telecom, specialising in telecommunications, going through an apprenticeship, and then 3 years on specialisation. And then I joined Cable and Wireless. That was quite a radical change for me because Post Office Telecommunications was quite strict and very tight parameters on what you actually worked on. When I went to Cable and Wireless, if you were standing next to it, you owned it. A bit like in the studio, whoever's closest to the piano plays it. That's exactly how it was in Cable and Wireless. If you were standing there, it's yours, you're responsible for it. I specialised in something called packet switching in Cable and Wireless, and that was, so you can check the date, 1979 to 1984. That was actually one of the early cloud technologies, and cloud's been around since the 50s, so it's nothing new. Then in 1984, decided to launch my own business with a friend from Cable and Wireless, and I've been doing that for a number of years until about 4 years ago when I decided to hand over to someone to run the business so I could take a bit of a back step and to do things like this. So here I am. I was also on call for about 30 years and I just got a little bit tired of going to sleep at night waiting for the phone to ring. So I thought I was due a rest after that amount of time. I don't want to turn in that. I said it wouldn't take long for the technology to fail, would it? It's actually the operator, not... What have I done?
I'm not sure.
I told you, I'm a fraud.
Let's restart.
Just
It's just the
next and back.
Yeah.
I need my grandsons here to operate this.
Is that the right place? Is that where you want to be?
No, a bit. So if I go back, it's working now. Isn't it?
Yeah.
It must have been me. During my time with Astro Communications, I got to work on some pretty amazing projects, and I did a lot of work at the North Sea oil industry. S40's Charlie platform, spent some time on that. Did a lot of work for the city in dealing rooms, and most later on did a lot of infrastructure work for people like TGI Fridays, Haven, Butlins and Warner, Whitelink Ferries, and spent a lot of time on their sites. And Astro is actually now a niche ISP, and we handle all of the infrastructure for TGI Fridays and Elite Hotels and some others. But I actually spend probably the best part of my time now doing pro bono work for the WCIT and for CETA. I'm on the steering group for CETA, which is the Charity IT Association, which provides some free services to charities needing IT support. Got this crack now. I'm in the zone. So I'm going to be talking about outsourcing and managing infrastructure service outsourcing and managing infrastructure service providers. Now, I've seen this from both sides of the fence because I've been a service provider, still am a service provider technically. I've also seen it from the charity side of things, where I've been able to help charities to get the best out of their relationship with their service providers. I have some customer relationships that go back over 30 years, and they're based on mutual understanding and mutual respect, but also friendship. I don't believe in no friends in business. Just think that just doesn't work. I count all of my customers as friends, and that just is really just the way about understanding people. You get to understand people, they get to understand you, and it just naturally progresses into friendship, in my opinion. So So right, the PowerPoint list. So in relationships with service providers, we talk about a whole number of things: account management, service delivery, project management, sales, service desk. But this is our language. And realistically, in a relationship with a charity or any customer, in my opinion, there's no space for this. So I would imagine when you saw that list come up, there might have been a few oh no, it's a PowerPoint list, or this is giving me a headache, I want to quickly disappear out the back door. So, but this is one of the problems of non-technical people dealing with people like me. We work in all of these things, lists and what we understand and what we do day by day, but when we actually take the time to understand what you do, it becomes actually more interesting for us. So lessons learned. In terms of, this is a bit early for this one, but just want to set the scene for the next few slides. As a volunteer, pro bono volunteer, I found myself in a counselling situation on several occasions where a charity is engaged with the service provider. The service provider has delivered something that the charity doesn't feel was what they asked for, and then the relationship collapses and the communication breaks down, and it really is in a terrible situation. And I've been in meetings where I've had service providers one side, charity representatives the other, trying to find some middle ground to actually get them talking again, to work out a way forward, rather than just a relationship break down and try and start again. Because the risk is, if you start that relationship again, it's all going to go wrong again. I think for a lot of the pro bono work that I do, the breakdown is in the language. In many cases, the charity may, whoever's in the charity, whoever's responsible for IT may say, and I'm talking about small charities to medium here, not large ones, they may think, well, okay, we want to move this to the cloud, and they think about a physical server and say, we want to move this to the cloud. They'll say that to the supplier, and the supplier will say, okay, so they give you a price for moving that piece of equipment into the cloud. And that isn't actually what the charity wants or needs. It's because of a lack of understanding, maybe, of not just the technology, but of what IT is actually doing for the charity. So I always like to bring the language back into what's important to the charity. Fundraising, donors, sponsors, probably the list goes on. But these are important things that we need to understand to be able to provide an IT solution to meet your needs. Not just come out with something that we've supplied to someone else down the road, and because it worked for them, it's going to work for you. It just doesn't work like that. Rarely works like that. I have to get my finger away from that laser button. I'm in danger of shooting someone. I've worked on some very large projects, and I've worked on some very small projects, and I always use this. This is the best tool for me. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names of what and why and when, how and where and who. That's very powerful, even in the technical world, to actually take the time out to go through this and really understand what it is we're dealing with. And people like me, and I've been guilty of this in the past, rarely do that, and I've just learned through experience that this is the best way forward. And the fact, as I said earlier, I've only got Art O level, so anything going more technical than this, and I really do start to fake it. But this is really powerful, and this is something that you don't have to be technical about. So where do we go from here? Just got that in case I forget something. So who? The first question is who is the end user? We want to know who the end user is, who they talk to. And this is in IT terms, but it can also be in just dialogue. Who do they speak to? Because that may uncover some clues as to where IT can solve a problem. If there's a lot of time wasted in dialogue, in working out how to do something with someone, then maybe there's a solution there that can be fixed by IT. Who do they collaborate with inside and outside of your organisation? You may only have 2 or 3 people, but you may have someone that comes in on 2 days a week, and they have a collaboration with someone outside of the organisation and on a regular basis, and it's quite easy to miss things, and it may not be necessarily just an IT thing. It may be that there's a procedure or something there that's working really well that other people may be missing in their day-to-day work. So it's a good place to start. So what is it? What's their job function? What do they use? What do they use to do their job? What equipment do they use their mobile phone for their job? Not just for speaking, but have they got any applications on their phone that they use for their day-to-day work? And just talk about a real-life example here. There's a critical question here in the what, is that when you say what systems are people using, sometimes people use their own systems, personal systems, because they find them easy to use. So it may be that someone comes into the office, and you may have a small office with a small broadband link, but you've got someone in there that uses Dropbox on a personal account to keep your files. There's a potential information security or data protection problem there, but from my perspective, technically, if someone comes into an office with Dropbox on their laptop, they switch their laptop on, and if it hasn't had a connection with Dropbox the day before, it may now be starting to push a load of files, photos, videos, whatever it is, that's gone onto the laptop and now being pushed up to the internet, taking all of the bandwidth from your day-to-day function. And I've actually been out and had charities say, we need more bandwidth, we're running out of bandwidth, and it isn't actually they need more bandwidth, they need to know what's going on. They need what's on the need to know what's on the network and what people are doing. This is quite critical. And where? Some charities that I've worked with, they travel around, they work out of other theatres, maybe have workshops in places away from the office. So this is a question about where you're going to be working from, where your people are going to be working from. Is it the office, home, cafe, outreach? And when? What time of day? Now, just while we get to this point, I just really want to go back to my horrible IT list. There was something in there which mentioned service desk. Now, some of these things that we're looking at now, and certainly what time of day, if you've got a charity which has some critical activities that are outside the normal working day, then that's a time when you may need support. In which case the service provider needs to be geared up for that. They need to understand your times of day. Times of day that are important to you. Big service providers are great at saying, well, we're going to take our network down, maybe 8 o'clock in the evening, because that's outside working hours. But they make an assumption that everyone works 9 to 5. And we all know not everyone works 9 to 5. They don't always work in the same place. Everyone has the same requirements. Why is often missed, because assumptions are made as to why someone is using a certain application. It's always a useful question to ask, why do you use this application? Because then it may uncover, especially if it's a personal application, something personal on a phone or Dropbox, for instance. Is that being used because the solution provided by the charity isn't up to standard? And then, having established all that from the user, we then need to focus our attention on the systems. Now, this can get a little bit complicated, and this may need some input from incumbent service providers, or there've been a number of occasions recently where I've been working with charities where the person looking after IT has just been a volunteer working locally, and they're available at some time but not others. And so getting that information in and getting the information to understand how your systems are working may require some input from those people. I just want to use an analogy, just because if you are thinking about moving into the cloud, whatever the cloud is, and we'll come to that in a minute, if you're thinking of moving anything, server-wise, network-wise, you need to know what it talks to, who it talks to, why it talks to it, go through the who, what, why, where, when, for the servers, because you may move something. If we moved server A, for instance, server A may be sitting under a desk next to server B, and I've had this situation. This is real life stuff. I'm going to spare the names of the charities. It wasn't an arts charity, I hasten to add. But server A and server B are sitting under a desk, and server A gets moved to somewhere else. Now in terms of data speed flows very fast, but the server was moved to a point where server B couldn't talk to server A anymore, or the response times between the two were so slow that it actually broke the communication and didn't work anymore. If you can imagine the road analogy, if we take that roundabout, from where we are now to get to server B, we have to go via that roundabout. If we move that roundabout 200 miles away, we're going to have to drive 200 miles out of our way to go round the roundabout to come back 200 miles to get to that location where server B is. And that's what we can do with our data, and that's why we can break it by moving stuff without really understanding it. When you know everything there is to know, or certainly everything that you can find out about your own IT, you're in a much better position to talk to service providers. I will come back to this in a minute, but I wouldn't necessarily share the fact that you have all this information, and I wouldn't necessarily say use it and to try and design something, but I would just use it in the point of the fact that when a service provider comes back and says, we can do this for you, this is what we need to do this particular job, you've got the information to challenge them and say, have you thought about this? How are you going to go about this? And I'll get on to how in a minute. Anyone notice that I missed how? Anyway, back to another analogy, a roadmap. If we want to go somewhere, and someone says, I want to get to, if someone said to me, how do I get to your office? And I don't know where they're starting from, I can't really give them directions. So it's really important to have a good understanding of your IT and what it does for you, because that's understanding your business, the business of your charity. If we know where we're starting, we know where we want to go to, we've got a map, and it's easy to put a map together. So now we're at a position where we can start to think about selecting our service provider and bit of time. So we can start to think about selecting a service provider, and this is where all the how comes in. Now the best way I think of going about this, and I have gone through this process with charities, is to find some potential suitable charities, and the best place to find them is within your own community in IT for Arts. Find out who's doing good work for other members of the community. Speak to some of their customers and find out how their engagement is, and ask questions, not technical questions, but ask how they communicate. How do they deal with your business, your charity? Do they speak your language? Then get them in for a meeting, get them in for a chat. Talk to them and ask them how they would go about solving the business challenge that you have, not a technical requirement. You don't just want to say we want to move this to the cloud. Talk to them about your challenges and let them come up with a solution that actually it would be better if that was in the cloud. And when you've had a few people in and you've come to a mutual understanding, mutual agreement, you can select your provider. If we just talk about one of these examples recently, we had one of the charities I work with in the IT for Arts community. They went through the process of finding a service provider. They needed a new website, but they needed it integrated into an existing system, so there's a lot of technical stuff in there. So they went through all that process and they shared their information. They shared the information that they had gathered business-wise, what they wanted it to do for them, with the potential service providers, including a budget. And it was an eye-opener for me. I went to sit in on the panel with them when they interviewed the service providers, but it was an eye-opener for me. The fact that they'd shared the budget, and they're a charity, so budgets are really hard to come by. 2 out of 3 of the potential service providers, one was 50% over budget and the other one was 150% over budget. But the problem was the service providers were saying, but we're going to do all this extra work and we're going to provide this, this and this, and it was a complete smokescreen. And it would be easy to miss the fact as to whether they could actually do the job they were being asked for. Because there was such a smokescreen about all the extra stuff they could do, and it was coming at a cost. And 2 of the people around the table on the charity side were actually thinking, wow, we could have this. But when it came to the cold light of day and they started thinking about how they would go and ask for the extra money, and I did actually point out that in a formal tender process for a large organisation, we will be ruling out this information. And it's the only time I've really borrowed from large corporate type engagements in a situation like that, because you would just say, that's not relevant, we're not going to take it into our decision criteria. But it happens. So there are many benefits migrating to the cloud. Many benefits. I could rattle off a list. I've got some down here because I couldn't possibly remember them, even though I'm supposed to be technical. We've established I'm faking. Reduced capital cost, availability, simplicity, flexibility, elasticity, agility, scalability. Wow, even I'm falling asleep. And I wrote it. It's great, but how does that apply to what you're trying to do? What does it mean to you in a day-to-day running of your charity? Because that's important. All of these bits you can say, oh, actually, yeah, that bit there, availability, that's important because that's really important. Because when we've got people working out in the community, they need to be able to communicate back. We need to know what they're doing. It always needs to be in your language. So where do we start with cloud migration? Best way is, having gone through the engagement process with your service provider, get them in to tell you what to do and go through the process as to how they're going to deliver what you need through a cloud migration. And then with the newfound knowledge of your understanding your IT estate, you can question it, you can challenge it and say, have you thought about this? What happens if the migration fails halfway through? Sometimes migrating to the cloud is very simple. If you just want to use Microsoft Office 365, Word, PowerPoint and Excel, for instance, fairly straightforward. But email, for instance, anything involving your domain name could cost you downtime if that migration goes wrong. You could be out of communication for a couple of days, maybe longer. So get the expert in. I used this slide here a few years back, a long time back. We had a competition for some customers and suppliers for some time at Brands Hatch. Everyone in the room knew how to drive, but one of our suppliers sponsored Tiff Liddell to come in, who used to be on Top Gear many years ago and was a Formula 1 driver, to run through with people how to go around Brands Hatch without getting themselves killed. Everyone could drive, but he had some invaluable tips to make sure when people were out there were no incidents. And there were lots of cars on the track, but valuable advice. And that's what you need from a service provider. You need them to be able to enhance the knowledge you have and enhance what you're doing as a charity. So is this audit that I mentioned earlier about the going through and asking users, doing a user survey, is it valuable for anything else? Well, absolutely it's valuable for lots of things, including information security. If you don't know what you've got, you can't secure it. There's also disaster recovery and business continuity. if you had a disaster, then you need to know what there is to replace it. I'll leave you with one final thought. Before anything else, preparation is the key to success. And I think that's really important. And we all have a duty to make sure that your businesses, your charities, stay operating efficiently. Sorry, I just got one more thing I forgot to mention earlier. Does everyone understand what cloud is? So, just for clarification, just in case, the cloud is a central computing resource that you can have access to, and it's reliable, resilient. There's lots of things in the cloud that you don't need to worry about that make sure your data and your transactions, everything that's going on, stay safe and sound. We don't need to worry about what's in the cloud. All we need to know how to do is how to connect to it. That's what a cloud is. A cloud isn't taking a physical server, driving it up the road and putting it in a data center. That's not cloud. That's hosted, co-hosted, but just because that's been sold as cloud before, and that really is naughty. Thank you. Any questions?